Hello there, Evan Nathaniel Grimm. Today I will be discussing the Libra New Moon happening September 25th, 2022 at 2:54 p.m. Pacific Time. Before I begin, if you would like a reading from me, the link is down below. I do one-on-one sessions that includes birth chart consultations, transits, synastry, and solar returns. And also, if you would like a Saturn return reading, you could just book a transits reading and specify that you'd like to focus on the Saturn return. I've gotten a lot of questions about that ever since my appearance in the Vice article talking about Saturn returns. Go check that out. The link to that is on my website. So also, thank you to the 75 students who signed up for my introductory astrology course, class 5. The last course is coming up, and it's bittersweet, but I'm really, really grateful for the students and also the feedback. Gotten a lot of positive feedback, so I'm going to be doing another course in Q4, so look out for that. So this Libra new moon, you want to check out where 2 degrees of Libra falls in your birth chart. Look at the house that 2 degrees of Libra is in and any aspects that your other planets make to that point. Now, the title of this new moon is New Alliances. Now, the reason for that is because when you think about first of all, the meanings of Libra. So Libra is about trust, cooperation, diplomacy. It's also, artfulness and beautification, symmetry, harmony, balance. And then, getting into like the political domain, it will pertain to like justice and fairness, and, even equality more broadly. And then it's also one-on-one relationships and mentorship. But why would that energy create new alliances? Well, number one, any new moon is a new beginning. So I want to specify that. This new moon is your time to set intentions and chart a new course, embark on a new journey. However, in Libra right now, this is giving us some much needed relief because we do have Mars Gemini still, and I've been talking about Mars Gemini a lot. I have a natal Mars Gemini retrograde in my birth chart, so I'm very familiar with that energy. I've been leaning into that and giving people insights and predictions around the Mars Gemini transit. And so far, all the predictions I've made about it have come true. I have seen an uptick in very impulsive debates and subversive tactics in debates, and without a clear long-term goal for those debates, though. So Mars is short-term thinking in Gemini, right? Because Mars on its own is just like action, desire, drive, energy. But in Gemini, it has a very short-term focus. Mars Gemini cannot dwell on a topic for very long. It's the most restless Mars placement, I would argue. And so in Gemini, the words that we choose to speak to people are not always well thought out. They're actually quite impulsive and, again, short-sighted. And when we communicate in a short-sighted framework, we end up regretting much of what we say. So on top of that, we do have Mercury retrograde now and during this full moon, or during this new moon. So I just wanted to provide that context, and because the Libra new moon is potentially the forging of a new alliance as a way to sidestep this Mars Gemini energy. So the Mars Gemini energy has created a fracturing within groups, friendships, relationships, online communities. And so now we have this Libra energy ushering in to say, okay, now here is a gift of maybe a trustful, cooperative relationship that you didn't really think about before, that you didn't notice before. And the reason that we might be expanding these alliances into new groups or striking an agreement with a new person is because this new moon is opposing Jupiter, which is actually quite nice. So I'll talk about that. But before that, I also wanted to call out the fact that we are leading up to an Aries full moon, as we always do with a Libra new moon. But the Aries full moon will be conjunct to Chiron, and the Chiron energy will be opposing Venus, I think, exactly. So that seems to be a moment that is a little bit tricky. And it feels like that almost feels like a little bit of a fracturing of certain relationships. Now, when I say relationships, I don't necessarily mean, I'm not defining those relationships as romantic or friendships or business partnerships or whatever. So don't like worry about, well, this is a specific person I'm talking about. No, it's like There is, though, generally a little bit of a splintering and a schism within friendships, and some type of relationship maybe at that time. And so in the interim, though, the Libra new moon is bringing in new alliances that potentially even like set up that situation. But I think that those situations are actually stemming from things that have been going on the last few weeks and months with Mars Gemini. So again, Mars Gemini has created the grounds for a lot of unnecessary debates. For some people, it's actually a great time, right? I know that there's some people who are like loving the Mars Gemini energy. They're reading a lot, they're writing, they're working on something, and they're debating people who are, helping them expand their perspective, right? Like that's totally great. But, in the context of 2022, Mars Gemini is oftentimes just kind of spewing out information and opinions that are not really grounded in a lot, especially because we live in the information age. So there's a lot of information flying around, and so Mars Gemini is just kind of like brewing this chaos for the most part. And we still have Mercury retrograde during this new moon. And I want to talk about, and I want to double down on the fact that a lot of people will mistake or focus on the classification of something instead of the application. So whenever there's a Mercury retrograde, people will try to look at it from a textbook perspective only, but you have to apply Mercury retrogrades to the time and place that we're living in. And so a Mercury retrograde 10,000 years ago probably didn't have a huge impact. But then once you have a printing press in the 1400s, now there's typos, you have the radio in the 1900s, now there's miscommunication that ripples out, and then the internet, cell phones, the information age, Mercury retrogrades can be quite insidious because there's so many opportunities to mess it up. Now that does not mean that Mercury retrogrades are inherently bad. And in fact, Mercury retrogrades are necessary to double back on all the high volume of information, right? However, in 2022, it can get quite tricky. Now you pile on Mars Gemini, which I talked about as impulsive communication, and that is a recipe for a lot of chaos. And that's the word I've been using for this Mercury retrograde, and so far it's been playing out that way. So, when I say it's been playing out that way, I mean globally, right? Globally. So for you personally, subjectively, you might be okay. Maybe your birth chart is, really prepared for this transit. Maybe you have a lot of air energy, a lot of fire energy, and you're just like kind of used to this. You're kind of like, and you maybe don't have a lot of mutable placements or are getting squared or opposed or whatever by this Mars Gemini. But for many people, it's actually been quite a confusing time. So anyways, we have been a little bit irritable since the Virgo new moon because there was that Mars square to the moon. So lots of myopic debates and people provoking people out of like a twisted enjoyment. So people were motivated during the Virgo new moon to just rile people up. And again, we saw evidence of that throughout the online communities. But the Pisces full moon did bring us temporary relief through maybe creativity, spirituality, even an element of like forgiveness. But of course, the square to Mars Gemini still felt restless. So now let's drill into the Libra new moon. So to diagnose this Libra new moon, we have to look at a few things. So we want to take in the macro view, as I've been doing here. And from a macro perspective, not only is Mercury retrograde still during this new moon, but all of the retrogradable planets, except for Venus, are either retrograde or in a pre-shadow phase at this time. So all the outer and social planets are retrograde, and Mars is in a pre-shadow. And Mercury is retrograde. So that leaves us with Venus. So Venus is really holding its own. It's going direct. And it is the chart ruler, which I'll talk about. So that's important. But because of all these retrogrades during this Libra new moon, we have slowed down. And we have found it difficult to gain momentum and forward progress and accomplish new tasks or set out on new journeys. So it's a little bit awkward when you have a new moon with so many retrogrades, right? Because now it's like we're trying to start something, but whenever we do that, we run into these retrogrades. But the Libra new moon calls upon cardinal energy, which we've been kind of short on lately because we've had lots of stubborn, fixed energy and lots of kind of unpredictable, mutable energy. And again, Mars Gemini has been tossing everybody around with its sort of subversive, impulsive dialogue. But as opposed to Gemini, Libra is more conscious of the other. And this consciousness leads to alliances and agreements and partnerships. So that's what Libra has on Gemini. Now, I'm not in the business of comparing the strength of a given sign, but we have to be objective about the fact that Libra will be more conscious of the other person and the impact of the other person than Gemini. Because Gemini will just communicate for the sake of it. Libra will not do that. Okay, so Libra will actually be very considerate and diplomatic as a result. So it's kind of creating this little oasis. And to now get into the myopics of this new moon, it's opposing Jupiter, which actually provides some hope and open-mindedness. That the person sitting across from us has a shared perspective or something in common. So we are literally reaching out to understand the other side of the story. We are literally reaching out with a generous mind to try to understand someone else's view. And in an opposition, that has a relational dynamic anyways. So the Libra new moon opposing Jupiter and Aries, almost exact. This opposition actually provides the grounds for you realizing what doors are actually open to me, what partnerships and alliances was I overlooking. So Jupiter expands, right? And Jupiter and the sign it rules, Sagittarius, they tend to have a lucky streak simply because they are open-minded, simply because they believe that anyone can teach them something. So they widen their aperture, and it's like, okay, even if this person has a different sports team that they love, they like my rival team, or they have a different political belief, or they have different social belief, but there's something that we can agree on. So during this Libra new moon, that's the highlight right away. That's the most positive piece, I think, of this new moon. That opposition to Jupiter is opening you up to new partnerships that you never would have thought of before. Like, oh yeah, this creator, I can actually collaborate with them. Or, this, or my neighbor, or my coworker, who I thought didn't like me. Jupiter's going to look for more information on that and realize, okay, maybe we see eye to eye on some things. So, and again, I need to stress this. During Mars Gemini, so far, some alliances have been shredded. I'm sure that in your own life or in your friendships, someone in your life has lost a relationship or a friendship of some kind to maybe some of these really insidious tactics. So during this new moon, I ultimately foresee people agreeing to collaborate with new people and people like building a trusting, cooperative relationship with more people than before. So this is also a nice tonic to Saturn and Aquarius. I mean, Saturn and Aquarius has been shutting down group dynamics. So Libra is more about the one-on-one. So I do think that people are kind of specifically in your life. I think you will see one or two or three very significant alliances forming. So when I talk about what exactly does he mean by alliance? I don't necessarily mean like in a whole new community. Because again, Saturn and Aquarius is kind of limiting that factor, that network effect. However, on a one-on-one basis, you might find a new, partner, and I don't mean that just romantically. I mean that in a professional setting, business setting, or in a friendship. So again, there has been this fracturing, but I think that number one, that's the highlight in a positive sense. Now, what's going on with the chart ruler Venus, because Venus rules Libra? Venus has actually fallen here in Virgo because the criticality of Virgo undermines sometimes the hopes of reconciliation and partnership. And that Venus is opposing Neptune, so what Neptune does sometimes is it also inspires and vivifies the imagination. But I think in this context, because Venus has fallen in Virgo, I kind of see this as some partnerships maybe being forged under false pretenses. So that's why I have to limit the upside of the Jupiter opposition, because the Neptune-Venus opposition creates a little bit of an idealization of somebody, and a hopefulness and an open, like almost a blind trust that they will help you. So, but on the upside, this is a nice moment for creating, because Neptune and Venus are very creative together. And maybe trusting or forgiving a partner who you were at odds with. So again, it's not that Neptune always leads to deception. Sometimes it's actually that moment of forgiveness, which again, Mars Gemini has shredded through some partnerships. So that Venus opposition is that time for you to come in and say, okay, I'm ready to forgive you. But again, that blind trust can lead to deception. Now, let's shift over to Mercury, which is closely conjunct to this Venus, also in Virgo. Even though Mercury is in Virgo, which is domicile, It is not grounded in the facts always when it's retrograde, and on top of that, this is also opposing Neptune. So it's influenced by those inflationary effects of Neptune. So it's difficult to kind of figure out sometimes the details, compartmentalize, and it seems like to kind of add that up in a composite, it feels like people may distort the truth to make a relationship work. So that's why, again, it kind of shapes that new moon Jupiter opposition. It's like, well, okay, I am trusting more, I'm more generous and open-minded, but maybe to a fault. So you just want to like take that middle path of, yes, opening yourself up to new potential connections, but not not losing your instincts, obviously. Not doing that. And then we have the other retrogrades. We have, and I'm not going to dwell on each planet, but the point here is that all these other planets, the outer planets, the social planets, are retrograde. So there's a major slowdown. So it's like getting stuck in traffic, but with Mars Gemini, it's very restless. So it's like you're in the car, but you're caffeinated. So it's a little bit confusing and frustrating. And on top of that, the Mars Gemini is squaring Neptune pretty much. It's starting to form a square with Neptune, which means, again, our words can deceive. And you might find yourself rushing back into debates head first, but then tripping on your words and confusing the facts and getting foggy and having to do a double take. So this is not a great usage of Mars Gemini. It's not that Mars Gemini is inherently bad, but in 2022, with the network effects of like the information age and the internet, it can spiral pretty quick. So you want to make sure that you have a clear purpose for a debate that you're in. You and the other party are not necessarily trying to undermine each other. You have a clear goal. So it's like a scientist and astrologer. Okay, we want to like understand each other's the subject, our expertise. We want to come from a respectful position. That's fine, right? That's a great time for Mars Gemini to like figure out, okay, where can I borrow some concepts from this subject, and what can I learn? But again, here there's a lot of friction preventing clarity of thought, and it's not necessarily an amazing time for an actual kind of like coming to a more like detailed agreement. I think it's more of like an agreement that I will trust you and form that alliance with you. But again, to double down, it may be productive for reflecting, creating, and forgiving, certainly. Now, and to double down on the new moon Jupiter opposition, Jupiter is about travel and expansion as well, and discovery and education. So I think whenever Jupiter opposes the moon, like in someone's birth chart, I always assume, okay, you probably have moved around a lot, or you have sought to like explore the world beyond your home that you grew up in. So potentially, even on this new moon, there are a lot of trips being taken. A lot of people taking trips to new destinations, and maybe even like with Libra again, it can have an artful side. So maybe these destinations, maybe these learning experiences are inspiring you to create differently and to incorporate those experiences into your words, your poems, your songs, your plays. So if you're a creator, I don't dislike this new moon or even the last full moon. So there's that. And then, the final thought here, Uranus and Taurus squaring Saturn and Aquarius, that's coming up in October, shortly thereafter. These planets are both retrograde, but like Saturn is backing into that square. So it kind of means that it's suddenly contending with disruption. And what is contending with it? Like I'm talking about power structures and agenda setters, that's Saturn. They will face some disruption. There's like a stress test going on here where, it's like Uranus is demanding change. And Saturn feels stifling here. But eventually, but with all these retrogrades, it's hard to tell if there will be a clearly an obvious effect. So to give you a macro view into the future, really what we have going on is that slowly the planets will start to move direct again over the next few months. But by mid to late January, finally Mars and Uranus are direct as well. And at that point, I finally see this momentum, this full momentum leading up to Pluto and Aquarius in March. So that's a lead up. And keep in mind that once all these planets move direct, that's happening a few weeks after the new Congress is sworn in the United States. So certainly it feels like right now, even during this new moon, we are in a resting period. We are waiting for something. And as the gears start spinning again, they will usher us into a new era entirely, because that's what Pluto does, right? Pluto, once it changes signs, it heralds a new era. So when it was in Sag, there was a lot of religious conflict. When it was in Capricorn, as it is now, corporations consolidating power. And when Pluto enters Aquarius, all of a sudden, it's really decentralization of systems in a way that, in a redistribution of power so that everyday people have a louder voice. And if you want a preview of Pluto in Aquarius, which I'll do in a future video, you have to look at, I think 1966. Back, the summer of love when Pluto and Uranus were conjunct. Uranus rules Aquarius. So that's actually like a useful historical time period to investigate. And of course, what was going on around that time is we had this idea of communities, empowerment through the arts, new concepts around or pushing for human rights, securing those rights. So I think that Pluto in Aquarius will be this activation again of some of that energy of the 60s, the 1960s. So it'll certainly look a lot different than Pluto in Aquarius, which we've been under maybe you could argue, under the tyranny of since 2008. So we've had this too big to fail mantra, and that's changing. That's going to change. But right now, we are in a holding pattern, right? So think about this. Think about the later part of this year, like where we are now, as a holding pattern. We're just kind of circling the sky. We're circling the sky. We're in a holding pattern. And it's just kind of like it's an ellipsis, ... wait. It's just a waiting period. And so that's frustrating. I understand that. But you do have to be objective about astrology and understand, okay, when is it a time to rest and reflect? And when is it a time to go for things and move forward? And this is not that time. This is just not that time to move clearly forward. However, this is the time, this Libra New Moon, to sit down with somebody who you may either were at odds with or maybe just didn't notice, right? So that's how you should use this Libra New Moon. Who can you forge an alliance with? And as a tonic and as a, as a solution for the Mars Gemini fracturing, which is what that transit has been doing. And Mars is already in pre-shadow, right? So we're already kind of feeling exhausted by the debates. But there's a lot of them. So anyways, this Libra New Moon, again, you want to calibrate this with where it is in your birth chart. So for everybody, the themes I've been discussing will hold true, right? That is the theme of a Libra Moon opposing Jupiter. We're expanding our aperture, seeing potential alliances and partnerships. But if you have the Libra New Moon, for example, in your first house as a Libra rising, then I think it'd be more obviously that way about forging that, maybe partnership, right? But if it's in your second house, suddenly there's a financial kind of undertone to it. If it's in your third house, there is a learning and discovery undertone, educational potentially. If it's in your fourth and 10th house, suddenly there's a relationship between your home and your career. If it's in your fifth, something about your creative expression and how you connect with online communities. And then finally your sixth and 12th house, there's a connection between the mind, the body, and the soul, and maybe even acts of service. So if you want to kind of look into that further, I will do an October 2022 forecast on YouTube in which I reference this new moon a little bit more in detail for each rising sign and the Aries full moon that follows that 2 weeks later in mid-October. So I will be doing a little bit more of a deep dive into that because I know my September 2022 forecast on YouTube, I was more focused on the Pisces full moon. So I will lean into that more. And thank you so much for joining. If you want a reading, again, check the link down below. I hope you all have a great day or evening, morning, wherever you are.